Hi, y'all. I'm seeing a ton of people writing in the chat. This is awesome. Um, I'll maybe give people, let's say, 3 more minutes. I'll play 50% of one other song before launching us if we feel good about that. Um, and then we can get started with our super exciting presentation for tonight. Thanks also for the people who are answering the poll questions. It's just to figure out kind of where we know a lot of people with DSA chapters have started a similar campaign, and we're trying to figure out where people maybe are with that, or if you haven't started a campaign. And thanks for considering that. I'm echo. I'm gonna do microphone on and off again if I'm echoing, but please let me know if it's hard to hear me. Okay, y'all. I think I'm gonna get us started because we have three three presentations for tonight, and I want everybody here to be able to get all of them. So welcome. My computer is taking a second to load up the slideshow, but welcome to everybody who's here. Thanks for checking out this mass call about getting the plaque out. I'm seeing a ton of people in the chat who have engaged with this discussion from the flock perspective, from the surveillance perspective, and from the DSA perspective, in a lot of really cool ways. It's really good to have you here. Um, so I can maybe get us started with so I will get us started by saying welcome. My name is Victoria, and I am from the Richmond, Virginia DSA chapter. And we are one chapter that is running a block plot campaign ourselves. We've been doing it since January, which is not as long as a lot of other DSA chapters around the country. And but still it's been 6 months, and in those 6 months we have um like built a pretty cool coalition in a city that has already had really public discussions already about predictive policing and about um like racialized policing. So it's been a cool thing to add to that puzzle um from where we are living. Oh, nice. I see some of you have seen our billboard. That is not the most important thing that we have done. It's not the most consistent thing we've done. It is the coolest thing I think we've done. It's a lime green poster that says, "Tell the mayor, get the flock out." Um, yeah, get the flock out. Hang on. These slides will pop up in a second. I'm having a little bit of tech trouble. But thanks for everybody who has been sharing so far in this chat. Um, oh, beautiful. Thanks a ton to my super amazing person who I could not live without, brain partner, um, Marilia, co-chair of the International Migrant Rights Working Group. So I think we can skip to the third slide at this point, just to give a quick overview of we've maybe talked about this a little bit already, but just to give people a framing of what brought us into this discussion and why it's relevant to discuss when talking about migrant rights in like across the nation is that, and I won't talk too much about Flock itself because I know that Sarah from Electronic Frontier Foundation's presentation will cover a lot more in depth what the cameras are and kind of like the ecosystem of policing they exist in. But if you weren't a surveillance expert, and I'm not, I think to this day a surveillance expert, but if you didn't have your finger on this pulse for the 3 years that it's been making news and disrupting communities, you might have had a similar experience to mine in finding out last year that it exists and can really easily give data to ICE. And it's just a fundamental function of how this data works and the data that it collects works and the way that policing works. We found out in Richmond, like many other communities in America, that ICE was sharing data. I mean, that ICE was able to access license plate reader data from communities in order to make arrests. And not every state in America had a similar agreement like ours did last year, but our governor decided to or pass legislation so that every single state agent, from state troopers to state level, I guess, social workers to I think the DMV. I don't my FOIAs have come back inconclusive on that, but could all be deputized as ICE. That means that every single locality that was collecting this data was collecting this data more or less for ICE, if that makes sense. Um, so it's huge from that perspective, from the perspective of defending immigrants. It's huge from the basis of protecting people seeking reproductive justice. It's huge for every single person um who has had a criminal any kind of engagement with the police that has resulted in some kind of a record written about them. Um, this this surveillance infrastructure really puts a lot of people at risk, and once surveillance rolls out, it is very hard to roll back. But the good thing about the way these contracts are rolled out in smaller localities, something that we found is that if you have a local contract, there's nobody better equipped to fight that than your local group, than so your local DSA say, or you can follow up with budgets. You can pressure elected officials. You can do a lot to fight back at a really local scale. And so I'm hoping that this call can help people begin to find tools or find connections or find a space to discuss how we can fight back against this surveillance. In the interest of time, and I know I'm not the best yapper, especially not out of the lineup we have tonight, I'm going to pass this microphone to Sarah Hamid from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. She's, I think, 2 slides further down. We'll be hearing from Sarah as well as from Cathy and Jacinta from Mijente, as well as Dr. Lily Irani from San Diego DSA, which is huge. And these are all going to bring really amazing perspectives that we hope ground this campaign for anybody who wants to run it. But again, I'll quit yapping. I'm going to pass the microphone to Sarah because she's going to knock it out of the park with a really awesome discussion on what exactly these cameras even are.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for having me. I'm excited to connect with all of you today. My name is Sarah Hamid. I'm the Director of Strategic Campaigns at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. EFF is a Bay Area-based nonprofit. We're a civil liberties organization, and surveillance is very much our turf. Over the past 2 decades, EFF has worked extensively on police surveillance technologies, including automated license plate readers, or ALPRs, and how these systems work, how police deploy them, and how they threaten privacy and civil liberties. That work includes things like public records investigations, technical analysis, and documenting almost 15,000 police surveillance technology systems across the country. My work at EFF focuses on the point where that research and public accountability meets organizing strategy. And that's exactly what this issue demands from us. Tonight, I want to talk about ALPRs and why communities are beginning to reject them, and importantly, how they are doing it. These systems are often presented to our local electeds as narrow tools for safety or efficiency, but what they actually do is turn ordinary movement into data, where people drive, where they gather, where they seek care, where they worship, and who they may be connected to. And just as important, these systems usually don't arrive into our communities through one huge public debate. They arrive quietly through contracts, pilot programs, renewals, and silent expansions. So the argument tonight is really simple for my portion. If surveillance is built through procurement, then procurement is also one of the clearest places to stop it, and that is where our strategic leverage is. I'm going to start with what ALPRs are and how they work, and just some ALPR 101 to kind of ground this conversation. And then I'll talk about why the risks are so much bigger than just one company or one device or one vendor. And then I'll end with what communities in places like Denver, Austin, and Oakland are actually doing to organize against these contracts. Next slide. Okay, understanding ALPR system architecture. Let's start with the core system. ALPRs are deceptively simple systems. And in a little while, I'm going to tell you why they're so simple. It's because they've been around for something like 60 years. So it's a 5-step automated process. First, cameras capture images of passing vehicles. Second, a software isolates the plate and reads the character using OCR. Third, that plate data is sent to a central server. Fourth, a system checks the plate, that plate data against a database or watch list. And fifth, everything is stored for future reporting, searching, and analysis through a user portal. This sequence matters because it shows us that it's not just a camera taking a picture, right? It's a pipeline for collecting, processing, storing, and retrieving movement data. And the real issue is not just the image, it's the creation of this searchable historical record. Next slide. So this slide shows you the different ways that ALPRs are currently deployed. Some are fixed and mounted for constant monitoring. Some are mobile and scan while, like, for instance, police cars are driving around. Some are portable and can be deployed quickly for temporary use. You see these sometimes coming up in protest zones or where there's street actions happening. And as the slide notes, they often use very advanced cameras, including infrared, and capture images in day or night. And although the hardware may be very simple, may vary, the function kind of stays the same. They convert streets, neighborhoods, parking lots, and roadways into capture zones, and they make ordinary public movement and public gathering continuously legible to a system built for retention and search. Next slide, please. So this slide kind of maps out for you how ALPR technology developed over time. So in the 70s and the 80s, these early systems were really bulky and difficult to use. I will share the slides with y'all to send out afterwards as well, so that you can make sure that you're able to capture some of the text that might not have been able to show up on the screen right now. So in the 70s and 80s, these systems were expensive and bulky and difficult to use. They needed specific lighting and camera angles, but they were innovated around counterterrorism in the UK, specifically around car bombs in Ireland. In the 90s, the technology became a little bit more practical, and they arrived in the United States in 1998 through Customs and Border Patrol for border security. So they have always had an entanglement with border policing in the United States. In the 2000s and after, when computing power got cheaper, devices became more affordable. Remember that really deceptively simple 5-step process? Each part of that process over the years became easier and cheaper and more advanced, right? So for a moment in time, you had a lot of innovation around the hardware itself. And that's when vendors like Flock Safety were able to enter the market with a low price point product, because they could sell you really cheap hardware. Now we're seeing a moment where there's innovation around compute and the ability to synthesize mass amounts of data, right? Because of AI. And so you're seeing things changing in terms of the back end and the analytics capabilities that these systems are able to provide now. We're in the AI enhanced phase, where vendors are marketing things like vehicle fingerprinting, which is identifying a car with more than just its license plate, with scratches on a side door or bumper stickers or other kinds of political speech. Next slide, please. So this is a evolving vendor ecosystem. And this slide is really important because it reminds us that it's not just about Flock Safety, it's about the whole vendor ecosystem, right? You have vendors like Axon, Motorola Solutions, Genetec, Rekor, and it's a much larger market, right? And the point is not just one company, but the whole problem in the whole vendor ecosystem, because these companies, once they go out of business, right, that data still gets sold. These are private moats that they build around the data. So these are data assets. And once that data lives in a database, it gets collected and it moves into places that are entirely unexpected, right? Sometimes it can move into things like a Thomson Reuters database, for instance, that law enforcement agencies who don't even have a subscription to Flock Safety can query data, or don't even have a subscription to another ALPR vendor can query ALPR data, right? We now also have transformations in the business model. We have cloud-based transformation and subscription-based services that are replacing the traditional hardware sales. We have AI-enabled identification. And we're entering, in other words, these cities, right, they're not buying one-off cameras. They don't even own the cameras. That's why you're seeing stories show up about how some cities cancel their contracts and they can't get the vendor to take the cameras down. The cameras are rented to them. They don't own the cameras, right? What they're doing is they're entering into an ongoing relationship with a private firm that manages the hardware, the software, the storage, the analytics, and the upgrade path. And as the market consolidates, companies increasingly sell integrated suites rather than isolated tools. So when we talk about resisting ALPRs, we understand that we're not just talking about resisting one company, although this is an important target for us, Flock Safety is, we're contesting this entire surveillance marketplace. Next slide, please. Okay, so Flock Safety, and keeping this broader vendor ecosystem in mind, this slide kind of helps explain why Flock became such an powerful player, right? Flock is understood not just a camera company, but they describe themselves in many ways as a surveillance social network, right? They invested very heavily in connecting their users together. They, in fact, didn't start in the law enforcement market. They started in the HOA market, the homeowners association market, right? And they decided that one of the ways that they could rapidly scale or grow their company as a startup is by connecting their users and building this social infrastructure layer where you're having users meet each other from different parts of the country in places like this International Chief of Police Conference and treat it like a networking moment. And so they build these relationships, and that I want you to keep those relationships in mind, because those relationships are going to be really important for the next little bit when I explain to you why this has become such an ungovernable system, right? Flock has now been described as operating more than 80,000 AI-enabled cameras across the country, with contracts involving more than 5,000 law enforcement agencies in 49 states, and they're processing more than 20 billion scans every month. That is a gigantic surveillance footprint, right? And what makes it work really is this network logic, because the more agencies, cameras, and users that join, the company argues, the more useful the platform becomes for everyone who's already inside it, right? The product in many ways is the network itself. The company also raised 30 million in venture capital to expand cloud services and video analytics, and its model relies on ongoing monitoring, processing, and installation services, not a one-time hardware sales. And so every new local contract does more than just add one more camera. It literally strengthens and enlarges this entire vast surveillance system. Next slide, please. This slide looks at the Flock network layers, and it pushes this idea one step further. So what we're looking at here is a layered ecosystem, right? There is capture layer at the very, very bottom, where the cameras at the localized level are collecting these images, right? And then they're turning them into readable data. But that data starts to travel, and that data travels up through the platform layer and the integration layer into other networks. It travels up to regional networks. It travels up to state networks. It travels up to national networks, right? And once you see these layers and how very, very quickly you can lose track of your data in a system like this, you can see why promises of narrow, limited use cases often break down. The architecture itself is built for retention, connection, and expansion. Next slide, please. And as a result, this slide gets at one of the most serious concerns. Local data does not stay local, right? This slide identifies different pathways to federal access. One of the things that Flock has been adamant about when it markets itself, both to our local electeds when they lobby them, but also in city council hearings, is saying that we don't have a contract with ICE. This is very important for Flock to say, because remember that evolving vendor ecosystem. How Flock took over the law enforcement market was when it was revealed that Motorola, a competitor, had a contract with ICE. So for marketing reasons, it's really important for them to say this, right? So they continuously say, we don't have a contract with ICE. But that doesn't mean that federal agencies cannot access their data. There are three pathways that I like to think about here in terms of how a federal agency that doesn't have a contract can get access to this data. The first is a formal pathway. There are federal agencies that have Flock contracts, right? But there's also federal agencies that can get access through established systems like contracts or legal processes, right? The second is informal pathways, right? And this is federal agencies relying on local partners to do side door searches or unofficial arrangements. Remember that social network that I was talking about? This is when you tap your buddy 3 states over and say, can you do a search for me? And they are your friend because you all met at the 2023 police conference, and they are happy to just do you a favor as a fellow law enforcement official, right? That becomes a completely invisible, untrackable way that these searches are happening without warrants and without any legal visibility whatsoever. And the last is, of course, unauthorized pathways. This is just an app, right? Which means that it has the same security vulnerabilities as any other app. Access can happen through misconfiguration, compromised accounts, or vendor actions outside local visibility, right? Ultimately, the platform itself is a single point of failure, which means all of that data that Flock is capturing, Flock is an incredibly leaky system, and it puts all of that data at risk. Next slide, please. So here I write, and we wrote about this when we investigated the feature updates that Flock was attempting to do, about how, given how pervasive, sprawling, and ungovernable ALPR sharing networks have become, the only feature update we can really truly rely on to protect people's right is and safety is no network at all. And this really gets to the core of the organizing strategy. Next slide, please. In 2025, communities across the country started to realize that there are mechanisms where they can just say no to this kind of surveillance purchasing. And they really started to experiment with what this could look like, right? And there was a tremendous moment of movement learning happening, because for a decade, right, an entire decade, the primary pathway or strategy around how to stop surveillance was doing things like trying to pass some sort of a transparency law or try to pass some sort of guardrails, right? But then we realized you can just make the abolitionist demand. You can just say no. And there are ways that your local electeds can act on that demand. So I want to talk a little bit about some of those movement learnings and how they've crystallized and catalyzed into what we're seeing nationwide, and hopefully what some of you are going to join as well in your chapter campaigns. Next slide, please. So first case study I want to isolate is Denver. So in spring of 2025, Denver considered extending a post-pilot contract for 111 flock cameras. The work in Denver for the organizers there included things like technical investigation, public records analyses, and council briefings. Ultimately, council rejected the extension by 5-4, but the lesson from Denver was that contract rejection is actually faster and cleaner than trying to build a complex oversight structure around a harmful system. And the most effective intervention is simply refusing the system in the first place. Next slide, please. The next case study and the next campaign site where we experiment around this is Austin, right? Austin shows how powerful that can be at scale. When Austin's flock pilot came up for renewal, the campaign coordinated grassroots organizing, including Austin's DSA, council strategy, and regional support. Austin's DSA played a huge role in this. The outcome of the vote was not to renew the pilot, and it shut off over 500 cameras overnight. That is the largest shutdown of ALPR systems in US history. And the lesson is that this model of just saying no is replicable across different political contexts. You do not need identical local conditions to win. You need a clear decision point, a real coalition, and a willingness to contest the contract itself. Next slide, please. Okay, the third one is Oakland. And Oakland is a little bittersweet for me because we worked really hard in Oakland and we did not get the win, but a tremendous coalition was built out of this, and that coalition is fighting back all over the Bay Area right now in Northern California. So Oakland is became one of the most sophisticated tests of the model in October, November, and December 2025. The issue was a proposed citywide flock expansion, and the organizing strategy here involved 8 independent constituencies moving in parallel with one shared goal, which means that it wasn't about message discipline. Instead, it was about objective discipline. And it was about people speaking from their own lived experience, whether it was you were a small business owner, whether it was you were coming from the repro community, whether it was you were coming from the housing justice community, right? So this wasn't about one shared message. This was about us speaking from our lived experience of different kinds of harm and then still moving towards this singular target, right? This breakthrough really matters because it shows that co-governance can scale, and people do not need to all come from the same politics or the same organizations or even the same priorities to act effectively together. And a strong campaign can coordinate differences without flattening them. Next slide, please. So this slide gives us a sense of like what really happened at the end of 2025. This was an inflection moment, and we've seen this continue into 2026, and it's continuing now, right? By December 2025, 853 ALPR cameras have been removed, blocked, or canceled nationwide from across 24 jurisdictions. And it was not symbolic, right? This is not a symbolic gesture. It was actual surveillance infrastructure that either came down or never went up. And it tells us something really, really important. These contracts are not inevitable. This infrastructure was built through a series of local purchasing decisions, and it can be challenged through that exact same mechanism, right? Those exact same local decision points. Every blocked contract matters to those communities involved because that is one less camera that is putting them and their community members at risk. But it also mattered beyond the community because every refusal weakens the broader surveillance ecosystem and shows the normalization of network monitoring is no longer acceptable, right? Especially in the current political conditions that we're living in. So I'll close here and say that ALPRs are not just cameras. They're part of a large system that captures movement. They store it, they share it, and they make it available inside an expanding marketplace of surveillance products. It's not just about one company. And the reason that communities have been able to fight back is that they found a concrete point of leverage to do so. And when they win, they are not just stopping one contract, they are asserting a democratic right to refuse mass surveillance together, and they are making that refusal contagious. Thank you.
That was huge. Thank you for sharing all of that, Sarah. Um, I'm going to ask just because we do have our next speaker is a little bit crunched on time. I want to make sure we can get to her slides before she needs to go. So if it's okay, Marilia, can we maybe jump to Lily's slides? And I think actually, Lily, you have your own slides to share and the ability to do that. But I'm gonna pass the microphone to you because I know you have to hop in the next 20-ish minutes before hopping into ICE and Palantir with the geniuses representing Mijente and Media Justice tonight. But take it away, Lily.
Muted. Let's see. All right. So, hey, everybody. This is an amazing and powerful gathering. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. And thank you for letting me shuffle things around. Have a family constraint. So I'm in the DSA San Diego chapter, and DSA San Diego chapter is a member of Trust San Diego Coalition. Trust stands for the Transparent, Responsible Use of Surveillance Technology. And we're a coalition that formed actually back in 2018. Before Flock Fights came together, we got together to fight something called the smart streetlights. It was like a General Electric's network of cameras and microphones, thousands all up and down our city. And so we fought a fight to get rid of those cameras and microphones, and we also got a surveillance oversight ordinance passed, which I'll tell you a little bit about. And then there was a kind of round two where Flock came into our lives in San Diego. This is kind of like the zombie child of the first Smart Streetlights program. We got defunded, but a new mayor came in and brought back Smart Streetlights with Flock in it. So this is a story that's going to cover a bunch of different surveillance technologies, but over the last year, we've been focused on Flock license plate readers. Okay, so phase one of our fight as a coalition was to say no to smart street lights. Uh, we had a mayor who was really into this idea of smart cities, and we're gonna have cameras all over the city that measure the number of cars and buses and bicycles, and it's gonna find parking spaces, and everyone can build apps on it, and it's gonna be so great, and we'll create an entrepreneurial innovation economy in San Diego. And as far as we can tell, like nobody on city council publicly talked about the surveillance capabilities of these cameras. So Khalid Alexander, who's an organizer with and founder of a group called Pillars of the Community, an abolitionist organization in San Diego, he found out about these smart streetlights from an organizer in NorCal, and he got a bunch of us together from different organizations. Uh, they'll talk a little bit about in a minute to come together and demand that the city needs to stop using the smart streetlights, and the city also needs to have a policy that requires city council to basically define surveillance technologies. And city council has to vote on every single surveillance technology that's being adopted in the city, even if it doesn't cost the city money. Because these smart street lights had gotten smuggled in as a contract for LED energy efficient lighting replacements. And so we didn't want to ever get surprised again. So that fight for the surveillance ordinance that required the city council public vote, uh, it took 3 years, and it was fought largely by a coalition of 30 community organizations that came from a bunch of different communities. There were immigrant community organizations. Um, Tech Workers Coalition was an organization at the time that I was actually part of and organizing with pillars of the community and racial justice organizations. So we had a multiracial community coalition that was fighting for this. And different communities, in line with what Sarah was saying about letting different communities have different messages, different communities had different reasons why they wanted to fight this. So, like Muslim community organizations, like Partnership for Advancement of New Americans, or the Majdal Center or Islamic Center of San Diego, where the shooting actually just happened last 2 weeks ago. they had been surveilled by the FBI since 2001 or even before, and kind of most recently through countering violent extremism programs. So they were thinking about this surveillance pipeline Sarah's talking about as feeding data from our streets straight to our fusion centers and to the FBI. Pillars of the Community, Khalid's organization, they had been fighting gang labeling and gang injunctions. So gang injunctions are a legal mechanism by which police go and basically stalk Black and brown communities, and especially Black communities in San Diego. And they say, looks like that person, because they're wearing a blue shirt, is in this gang. And looks like that person, because they're talking to their cousin over there and is in this zip code and is listening to this music, is in this other gang. And they will put people into a database that subjects them to enhanced like convictions, more years in jail if they get caught up in the criminal justice system. So pillars and racial justice groups were scared that this surveillance tech could be used to build new profiles of associations between people. Remember, it wasn't just license plate readers, it was also video cameras. And actually, that's something important to consider is like Flock is actually a video camera system that does all those license plate reads. So like they can be used for more than just license plates. So different groups had different reasons, lived experiences why they wanted to fight this. But in Sarah's words, which I just picking up from tonight because it's so clarifying, we had objective discipline. So over the course of this 3-year fight, we were able to actually we were able to fight to get the surveillance ordinance put in place that required a city council vote for every technology, surveillance technology, and it also required a privacy advisory board to have public hearings. So it gave organizers a 3-month lead time to from like when the city was submitting a technology for kind of advisory consulting to when council is going to be voting. So that's organizing time, that's research time, that's coalition building time. In the process, we also, we started the fight under, I think we started the fight in the Trump administration. And I think Black Lives Matter kind of mobilizations that were across the country that were so powerful with 12-hour, budget meetings to defund the police. Like those fights were happening at the same time. And it was through the energy of those fights that we were also able to get the street light cameras shut down. Now, doing that was way complicated, but but we did it. We got the first version shut down. And then there's quieter wins along the way. So our coalition had a strategy that said, until we have the surveillance ordinance, we shouldn't be accepting or refunding any surveillance technologies. And shot spotters, we got those shut down with the help of the reporting of the Associated Press and Lucy Parsons' lab that showed that Michael Williams was kept in jail for a year on doctored shot spotter data. And then one nobody knows about is that we have these kiosks in our cities. So some of you, if you live in like Berkeley or for example, you might have these Ike kiosks. These kiosks usually have cameras, so you might want to look into that. But we got our city to remove the cameras. So that we wouldn't raise a ruckus. So that was an exciting moment, and that was like a good 4 years ago or so. But phase two, Biden is president, like flashback to when Biden is president, we get a Democratic mayor, and we get the smart street lights like a zombie from the dead coming back. So our I'm not gonna go through so the first move our coalition made was to try to say no to the smart streetlights. We did try to refuse and make the abolitionist demand. Over a year and a half of fighting, what we got was that our city council officials wanted those video cameras, but they wrote about 25 pages of restrictive policies about who the police could and could not share the data with, what they could and couldn't use it for. So mostly it felt like a big loss, but but it did at least create an expectation that we're not supposed to be joining these big networks and sharing the data from the smart streetlights. But these smart streetlights now came with license plate readers. And before Flock was kind of in the national conversation and we weren't really thinking about Flock, we were just like, oh, okay, there's this license plate reader data that's going to be taken as cars pass by. And then Trump took office. So when Trump took office, it really transformed how people in San Diego, and I'm pretty sure all of like many parts of the country thought about what this data pipeline of license plates could be useful for. Um, Now, first thing that happened was that because of our surveillance ordinance in San Diego, the police have to write an annual transparency report about all of their surveillance technologies, who they share data with, what it got used for, if there are any complaints. They don't do a good job of this, but sometimes they make mistakes. And one mistake they made that was like actually being honest, which was good for our movement, was that they revealed that they had shared flock license plate reader data with 63 law enforcement jurisdictions, including federal law enforcement like FBI, Homeland Security Investigations, and Customs and Border Patrol, um, and out of state jurisdictions, which is actually against the law in California, but the police literally said they didn't know. They thought that SB 54, our sanctuary state law, was the same as SB 34, which says you can't share license plate readers outside of the state. So we found that out in like February 2025, and we knew about it. We were telling people about it as a coalition, but it really didn't feel like there was enough, there was like a ton of energy to fight until this photograph I have kind of on the left was taken by Pedro Rios of the American Friends Service Committee, marks a really pivotal moment. ICE did a super militarized raid in a suburban neighborhood on a Friday night at a restaurant everyone liked to go to. And this is a picture of a bunch of white people who live around that neighborhood giving the finger to ICE. So it was at that moment that we started building social media for our coalition for the first time, maybe like a year and a half ago, and we were able to kind of put the receipts about how SDPD is shared with ICE and build on that energy that people had, that rapid response energy we're seeing it all over the country, especially in Minneapolis, and connect ALPR to ICE in how people understood it in our city. At the same time, I work at a university, and there was also the Trump administration canceling student visas for things like rolling a stop sign and being in one of these law enforcement databases. And so university worker unions were also starting to pay attention to like federal immigration issues and surveillance. And the labor movement was also doing, like escalating their like intensity of fury, let's just say. There are ICE raids picking up union workers all over our city, but also in LA, ICE famously threw to the ground David Huerta of SEIU, and that was on video, and I think it made national news. So our San Diego Imperial Labor Council, which represents 200,000 workers and over 100 unions, actually adopted the remove flock resolution and said, quote, ALPR furthers Trump's fascism, which and they've also been calling for abolish ICE. So in the last year, we were able to build a lot of energy, and that allowed us to expand from what had been a community coalition for the first 3 years into a community and labor coalition. We had AFT, our community college union, our UC lecturers union, UC AFT, our California Nurses Association that had already been calling for getting Palantir out of hospitals, signed on. UAW 4811 academic workers signed on. And so we were like growing our coalition, like our coalition was built on these like long-standing organizing relationships. There were like, multiracial, multi-religious community orgs. We were also building relationships with labor over this year, and then this galvanizing moment kind of let everything come together. And then social media allowed us to engage in narrative change for the people who are not part of these organizations, but we're seeing things coming up in the news and in their algorithm. And then in 2025, we actually had Sarah come speak in September at an in-person conference where we had about 150 people who'd like never met each other to organize come. And we had sessions on surveillance and labor, on surveillance and immigration, on how to build solidarity for the fight ahead to try to like go from, people just being activated as individuals to people becoming part of a movement community around fighting ALPR in San Diego. One thing I really want to note is that like this coalition work is so importantly built on Black organizing. So like Khaled Alexander from Pillars of the Community and their work against gang databases, um, was part of also a broader racial justice coalition that was fighting back against police violence before George Floyd was murdered, but also continuing throughout those uprisings. Also, Pillars had built relationships with some labor organizations as part of helping people get out of prison. And like, so there's a lot of different historical organizing relationships that can be part of how we build on those relationships to then show people, well, this is why flock also matters to the thing that we have already been organizing around over the last decade. And then the DSA's role in this, just like very transparently, was like it was been shifting over time. So for the first 3, 4 years of this organizing I've been telling you about, we had an organization called Tech Workers Coalition San Diego. And DSA was a place where, it was like a big tent org. And then when there were tech workers who'd come in, we would bring them into Tech Workers Coalition also. And as a smaller group, we were organizing as part of this coalition. When the Gaza encampments were happening, a lot of people were taking their organizing activity either into their university union spaces or into other kinds of community organizing spaces. So we kind of decided it didn't make sense to maintain Tech Workers Coalition in San Diego. And so now we're fully part of so now like my organizing home personally for Trust is DSA. And DSA, one way it's been really valuable is just bringing in a wide range of people from across the region that we can connect to this issue. Um, Also, the Migrant Rights Working Group was already organizing in a city next to San Diego. And so they built up a lot of like organizing power and awareness and community relationships. And so they were actually Marilia, who helped organize this call, and Ezekiel from our chapter brought a resolution to the DSA calling for getting rid of flock. Um, and we have a lot of people that are involved in organize different unions and different community organizations who come together in DSA. And so DSA, like the eco-socialists have their own reasons why they want to get rid of flock. The migrant rights group has their own reasons why they want to get rid of flock. So it's a place to hold the different lived experiences and the different kinds of analyses that all converge, and we need to rip this infrastructure out and crush it. Um, and finally, I wanted to kind of land this plane by talking about the ways that we've been doing this for 5 years. We've been organizing against mass surveillance for 5 years as a coalition. We've been organizing against flock for a year and a half. And we have multiple organizing moments. So for us, the surveillance oversight ordinance gives us the privacy advisory board meetings as a place to press that board to back up like what we as a movement are saying, which can kind of give us give us a different kind of legitimacy with certain communities. Um, but annual budget hearings are a place where the costs of surveillance, like $2 million a year for Flock, can directly be compared to like how many days you could keep the libraries open with that money, which always is a moment where even people who are like medium on the surveillance are like definitely way more into their libraries and parks than they are into the surveillance network. So budget hearings have been a powerful place for us to expand the movement. And then our ordinance also requires the city council to vote every single year to renew our surveillance technology. So that's another place where, we build, we put pressure, we kind of give people a place to go to focus, to learn and to focus their energy about why this stuff sucks. So, I would say that this has been a story. This is like some level, this is a spiritual journey for me. Like we want to win, but we've been losing our abolitionist demand to completely shut down Flock and the smart street light system. Like we've had multiple votes over the last couple of years, but in the process of fighting for that, we were able to get rid of ShotSpotter. We were able to get the surveillance cameras out of the Ike kiosks. We were able to get these restrictions that at least set a policy norm, although the fantasy of like actually having city council notice if if the police are sharing data wrong is like, it requires a lot of community watchdogging and FOIA requests and public records requests to actually do that. But at least it like sets the expectation that you're not supposed to share this data. SDPD for Flock actually doesn't allow other agencies to search our database. So other law enforcement agencies have to call the police officer and say, like, can you give us data on this license plate? So it like really slows them down at least, even though it's not what we were fighting for. But I also feel really, I observe that like more and more over the last year, and this is because of all the nationwide efforts that have been going on also, the public meaning of surveillance is no longer what the police have been telling the public it is. Like surveillance no longer means public safety to most people. The council meetings usually have like the same five people the police bring talking about why they want this stuff, and we've had like up to like 700 people like fill the overflow talking about surveillance is money not spent on the local economy and jobs. Surveillance is infrastructure for ICE. Surveillance is extracting money from the local economy and sending it to Silicon Valley techno-fascists. The surveillance is right for police abuse. So I do feel like we are making massive gains in the culture war. And, it's up to us to strategize in our own regions, in our own organizing formations, how we can confront the structural factors that are making it easy, that are making the police still able to win where they have not, where these surveillance infrastructures where we haven't been able to beat them back. So thank you so much. I'm really excited about the organizing that's going to be sparked off and strengthened, and we're finding each other tonight. And thank you for organizing this call. That's what I got.
Thank you for that. That's so awesome to hear. I'm also stealing surveillance's infrastructure for ICE. Money that goes to surveillance is like, thank you so much for that. I love the local perspective, and I love that you ended on a note with ICE, because I think that's such a good place to hand off the microphone one more time to Carillo, if you feel ready to go. It's you and Jacinta to wrap us up for the night on behalf of Media Justice and Mijente.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, welcome everybody. It's been incredible to hear so much of the work that's been happening. Mijente has been launching the No Tech for ICE campaign all the way back from 2017. And so the work that we did really had to do with the support that we were providing to our membership hub. So what we say is that Mijente is not just a national organization, but it is actually a political home for Latinx and Chicanx folks to figure out what their connection is to the broader issues that affect our community. But what was really interesting was that when we launched the No Tech for ICE campaign, we started hearing through the Chingala Migra tour and through the work at in sanctuary cities that ICE was still somehow finding our members. And so for us, it was being able to understand like how is ICE accessing this data, and how important it was for us to be able to figure out, like, for example, how someone in Chicago was stopped and then taken by ICE. And we found out that ICE had accessed the Chicago gang database, and we wanted to know how exactly they had accessed that data, what gave them access to the data. So we've been doing the work in many different spaces and places to talk about that access to that data. And so obviously during Trump 1.0, we saw so much of this come into light. In 2019, Mijente released our report, Who's Behind ICE, where we kind of dove into the corporations, the people that were making the moves to really make themselves the people that were getting these federal contracts, right? We were understanding that there were a couple of key players in this space. Next slide for me, please. Go ahead, yeah, if you'll move through that. And so through this report, we were able to identify a couple of the key companies and really like how they were functioning together. So we had the data brokers like Thomson Reuters and LexisNexis that were taking the data that was being collected from our utility companies, from the third-party vendors, and really holding on to that. And then you had the data analysts like Palantir that were creating products based off of this data that was either purchased by another company or that they found, or that they themselves have purchased to be able to create lists or target lists or information or some kind of product. And then you had Amazon that has like Amazon Web Services, which is where a lot of, and Microsoft, which is where a lot of this software is stored, right? So they need a central storing place, and that leads us to like the data centers and all of the other things, right? And so for us, it was important to give people the information that these were the companies behind these huge moves, and that they were doing things like biometric and tracking, and that we predicted, we had this crystal ball and saying, hey, these companies are making the move, but it's for some purpose, for some reason. And so in that report, we talked about the possibility of, the biometrics and tracking like CBP1 app, and what we saw coming forward. And so we understood that in order to be able to confront such a big system working against us and targeting our people, it wasn't going to take just one strategy. This had to be a whole movement. And so No Tech for ICE really became not just a campaign where Latinx and Chicanx folks can become involved, but larger, where communities that were interested in how this information was being shared, how their data was being shared, how the tech tools are being developed, could get involved. And I think that to me is one of the huge aspects of the No Tech for ICE campaign. Next slide, please. And so we know that a huge part of this is not just from one administration. We know that people have been fighting against this technology and against the funds going to DHS for many, many years, right? And it's gone through several administrations in which the DHS budget has increased. We saw for several years how the budget was around $1 billion. Then it jumped to $1.5 billion, all the way to where now we're seeing them requesting billions of more dollars for the militarization and warfare, for the surveillance state, right? And so this isn't just the responsibility of one administration, but rather us talking about surveillance as if it's something that is like new and techie and going to improve the safety, when in reality, it's putting our communities more and more at risk. And it's not just based on immigrants. Immigrants are the testing ground, and we're the testing ground, like Sarah mentioned, for a lot of the technology that's being developed, but it is being used and will be used against other communities, as we've seen happen. As we've been seeing happen. If you will next slide, yeah. And so at the center of this feast, we were able to understand what is all the information that's being collected, from family relationships to the addresses to schooling, all this data that's being collected. And we identified Palantir being a really big company that was making a move. They're the ones who you have seen on the news create a 20 million target list of individuals, who have created an app that's essentially like a Google map where they can just throw a net and find all of the targets. And all of that is based off the data that has been collected. And that includes flock cameras, that includes automatic license plate readers, because all of this data is still being fed. And the investors in Flock and the investors in many of the LPR companies that money comes directly from the founders like Peter Thiel themselves. Next slide, please. So we did the work with our community hubs. We did the work with our people to call it out. The 19 campuses that had Palantir as a huge sponsor have actually since removed their sponsorship or like their very public relationships with Palantir from their websites. We asked the Amazon workers to join us. It's been a multi-sector movement. This has been students, academics, workers. It's been the immigrants' rights sector. It's been a comms and digital strategy. But there is always a way in which people can get involved. And like people have mentioned in the comments today, this work is so intersectional. Next slide, please. And these are the people responsible for it, right? In this report, we go into how these people, Peter Thiel, who is the founder of Palantir, Sam Altman, who is the founder of OpenAI, Palmer Luckey, who is the founder of Anduril, and Jeff Bezos, who's the founder of Amazon, if you'll go to the next slide, are all part of these folks and more, are all part of this term that we've been talking about, which is the tech oligarchy, right? And so these folks had made the moves back in 2019 when we lanched the report, had made the moves to really establish themselves as the folks that were making the shots, putting in the money, getting the contracts, and making sure that they had their foot in the door. And so now we are in 2026, and we're looking at all of the moves that they made, in which they're not just making themselves the ones that get these contracts, but they're making themselves the decision makers around what happens with the future of technology within our military and within our federal, local, and state governments. that feels really scary because it means that, like, yes, there are these relationships that end up happening where at the local level, like we've heard, there are these like free offers. I don't know if you guys have experienced it, but we have experienced like free offers of drones in our local municipality. And there are these free offers all around the gist of like public safety and what does it mean for police to be over militarized for in the word of safety. And so there are communities across the nation that are fighting against this, all because these folks can't get enough money in their pocket and they want more and more and more. And they're looking for more of the opportunities in which they can not just grow their wealth, but also grow their ability to call the shots around surveillance. You will go to the next slide for me, please. And so with that, it brings me to the Purge Palantir campaign. Mijente was one of the organizations that helped launch the Purge Palantir campaign. Next slide, please. And you can actually skip twice. Purge Palantir, we wanted to highlight specifically the ways in which Palantir has been moving and has been doing this, because it's not just the government contracts. They actually have contracts with hospitals that manage drug supply chain, which means that the decisions happening in healthcare are not being made by humans, but rather by numbers, and people aren't being treated in that way. They're involved in supply and logistics and delivery routes. It could be like your favorite beer it has Palantir tech. We found out that Heineken uses Palantir tech. They're involved in transport. Unfortunately, Delta also uses Palantir tech. They're obviously involved in defense and safety, energy and utilities, finance. And so they really have their hands all the way from Wendy's to Beyond Meat. There is actually a list of 30 plus companies that use Palantir tech that we have posted on our Purge Palantir site. You can go check it out. It's Purge Palantir client list. And you can also check us out on Instagram, Purge Palantir there. But it is important for us to understand that, like, yes, they started with the government, but they're not stopping there. They are wanting to affect the affordability and the way that people are able to actually live day to day, right? This is like the capitalism of it all. Next slide, please. And so one of the parts of our campaign at Purge Palantir is the Palantir payroll, where we have been targeting members of Congress that have been receiving any type of payment or contributions to their campaigns. And so we've been trying to figure out how do we make sure that folks are hyper aware that all of this policy push that's happening, again, at the local, municipal, state, and federal level is coming because they're getting some type of kickback from it, right? Like, it's one of the reasons why Palantir actually moved their headquarters from Denver to Miami. They themselves cited that Denver was not being welcoming to AI and the future of AI, so they decided to move down to Miami. But what that really tells us is that, like, this work is important. It's important to call out the corporations at the head of it, and it's important to call out what they're doing at the head of it, so that there's not just another corporation or company that pops up that will, not another company that just pops up and do the same thing in its place. Next slide, please. And I'll stop there. But yes, so I saw the question on there. Our Who's Behind ICE report from 2019, you can find on our website at www.notechforice.com. And we are super excited at Mijente because we are partnering with Just Futures Law and Surveillance Resistance Lab to release another report, The Tech Behind ICE. This time we're going to go into depth about what are the tools that they're using? Who are the new players that are participating in this work? What is the political aspect behind it? And so I'm excited about the second report and going deep into this, into the political aspect of it all. But you can download our last report from the notechforice.com site that is linked in the chat. And I hope that you all will join us both for that release of the second report and for the webinar that will happen soon. And all of that will be sometime the next week. So make sure you go follow the pages, Con Mijente and No Tech for ICE, to stay up to date with that information. And I'm going to pass it over to Jacinta while I take a look at the questions.
Amazing, Cathy. It is so wonderful to be here with y'all. I am so excited hearing all of these amazing organizing tales of resistance against all of these surveillance mechanisms. My name is Jacinta González, she, her pronouns, and I am head of programs at Media Justice, but also a very proud Mijente member, and have been involved in the No Tech for ICE campaign with Cathy for a minute. But my part is really easy. I'm not even going to do my slides, which is just to say, where are they storing all of the surveillance? It's data centers. So for us, I think as we're connecting all of these dots, as we're thinking about intersectional movements, as we're thinking about how we continue to use the energy that we're seeing, I think that it's been really important to just really point out, Cathy was talking about the tech oligarchs and what their plan is for all of us, and thinking about not only these systems of control and systems of policing that they're helping to build up and profiting from, but also the resource grabs that we're seeing in our communities, right? At the end of the day, it is about control in all of its forms. And so that means controlling our water, that means controlling our environment, that means controlling our economic future. And so we know that there's been incredible energy around fighting data centers. We've seen incredible stories of resistance, of victory, of people trying creative, both creative and also the classics in organizing in terms of being able to shut down these projects in our communities. And I think for us, it's just been important to connect them back to, and part of what they're building with this is the infrastructure for surveillance. And so all of these fights are connected. So hopefully we will have more time in different conversations to go in deeper, but just wanted to make sure that folks were thinking about those fights. At Media Justice, we have a couple of different toolkits for folks that are organizing against data centers, have been talking about how these are fights that are also connected to how we've been fighting extractive industries like the petrochemical industry for a very long time. So wanting to make sure that those connections continue to be there and live. And we'll just say the last thing is, a lot of this stuff is going to be coming up in our election, right? I think the tech oligarchs are investing millions of dollars to undermine democracy, to make sure that we're not participating, to make sure that we are so afraid of these surveillance systems that we're actually not organizing and communicating with each other. So just also stay tuned as we're trying to unpack that in our organizing around how we talk about what our democracy means, what living in local places means, and how we can actually organize to create the world that we know that all of our communities deserve. But I will pass it over to organizers for a couple of last questions before we wrap up.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for staying on. We'll have another 15 minutes or so. We're going to try to get through some of these questions, and then we have a bunch of important links and follow-up calls to action. So please stay on till the end. And I want to say thank you so much just to all of our speakers, to Sarah, who's the Director of Strategic Campaigns for EFF, Cathy Carillo, National Organizer with Mijente, Jacinta González, Media Justice Head of Programs, Dr. Lily Irani, Professor of UC San Diego and a leader with the Trust Coalition, and of course to our fearless leaders, Victoria and Marilia. It's just really great to have like a lot of amazing, powerful women on this call. So just felt, had to show you all your flowers. And of course, we know all too well the role that these companies, these corporations are playing in the current administration's reign of terror. Obviously, a lot of them are companies that are holdovers from previous administrations. But as tech continues to be sort of in the spotlight and the role that it plays in our lives is way more prominent, it's super clear no such thing as neutrality when it comes to tech and how it's used. Surveillance is not equating to safety. It's driving people into hiding, especially those most vulnerable. And as socialists, this issue matters because our goal is to build and win a society that allows us to be more human, whereas these tools are driving people out and away from the public sphere, because mass surveillance only serves to remove agency from us, to remove consent, and of course, as a critical tool of political oppression. So really grateful for everybody here joining us, and really excited to hear that you're, wanting to either start or are already in the works of doing a bunch of great campaigns against whether it's FLOC or other ALPRs. And so I'm going to get in, without further ado, we'll get into the questions. Someone asked, are these FLOC contracts related to the 287G agreements? Just very briefly, not directly, but they are often carried out hand in hand. To concretize this in Texas, I am in Texas, our Department of Public Safety entered into a task force model, which is a part of a 287G agreement, deputizes our state troopers to act as agents, but also to carry out traffic stops or like retenes, and making sure that people then, these troopers are able to stop people and ask about immigration status. And unsurprisingly, in that same vein, also then entered into a $30 million contract with Flock, aiming to expand the tools at their disposal to carry out surveillance. And then, of course, Flock cameras can pool data across, a massive interagency network. So, of course, the fervor for those agreements just makes everybody less safe. But those are often going to go hand in hand as the propaganda and the scapegoating of immigrant communities continues. Somebody asked, and I'm going to put these two questions together if Sarah can get these questions answered. Are contract renewals the only window to get existing Flock systems shut down? And are you aware of cities that have had luck in getting rid of Peregrine software? So I'll pass it to Sarah.
Okay, so no, renewal is one of the easiest windows, but it is far from the only one. What you want to do is you want to map your city's termination pathway. Now, one of the ways that we have ended up in this place where we've had runaway surveillance purchasing in this country is that municipal surveillance procurement laws are insane, right? They're not like state or federal laws that are super strict and regulated. They are chaotic. Every city has its own rules. There are county rules on top of that. And vendors have gotten really, really good at going city by city by city by city by city, just exploiting that complexity, right? You want to start by figuring out what your city's actual code and the contracts say, right? So you want to pull the contract stack and you want to identify, are there other opportunities and leverage points that you have? For some folks, that's the renewal window. For other folks, it just got put on the agenda, right? So you want to think about things like does your contract say, is there a clause about termination for cause, right? So in some cities where they identified violations through open records requests, that gives you an opportunity to appeal for termination for cause, right? There's termination for convenience clauses. Sometimes cities can exit without even proper notice. There's budget and appropriation levers that you can look at, right? And sometimes those don't even require a formal vote, right? It's a budget line item vote. It's not a vote on the item itself. There's council override, there's item recall, and then there's grant funding termination, right? So there is tons of different ways that you can identify and map out your strategy. And I think of it like maps, right? These are very similar to just escape maps. You're going through a bunch of legal texts and city codes to identify what are all of the ways that we can route our way out of this system, right? And if the first lever doesn't work, go for the next one. If the next one doesn't work, go for the next one. In some cases, we found out by looking at the city code that the city manager is the one that has all of the authority and they can just pull the trigger on this decision. You don't need to even wait for a council vote. You don't have to lobby 5 or 7 people. You can just look to one person and radicalize them on why mass surveillance is bad for your community, right? So the next question was about Peregrine. There is an article that will get shared out with the links afterwards about Durham, and I think that's a really important story to look at. The Durham city manager pulled a $500,000 Peregrine contract at the start of the city council meeting after organizers raised flags about mass surveillance and racial profiling. And that's the city manager pulling. So your decision makers here are not just your elected officials. Different people have different procurement authority in your city, and different city workers can do different things, right? Durham residents explicitly linked Peregrine to Flock, and Flock's Peregrine's value proposition is aggregating data from the Flock cameras into a single AI queryable interface. So blocking one informs the fight against the other. And that's another thing that we're seeing in places like in Austin, Texas. Once you have figured out how to map your city's purchasing architecture, how to find your termination pathway, to take advantage of those decision points, it applies to other technologies too. So just like we got to this place, decision by decision by decision, you can start to undo those decisions and literally dismantle mass surveillance.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Another question, how can I file a FOIA to know what is being done with the data they collect? Is there a way to get them in trouble for not using breakaway bases? I'll pass it to Victoria for that one.
Hi. So, sorry, the two-part question is, Sorry, I'm looking to read the whole question because I'm seeing two parts. Is that one of the parts is how to do a FOIA, and another one is there a way to get them in trouble for not using breakaway bases? So, I don't know if this is going to be the best answer to the question. But I will say that FOIAing was a huge part of, like, in the city of Richmond, there was no, and my understanding is this is kind of the same everywhere, is that there's Block has never been on the agenda. People voted, and then like through a vote, people said yes to Flock. We found out every aspect of our contract through FOIAing. In Virginia, or maybe better in Richmond, it's been very hard to FOIA specifically for what data is getting collected and how it gets used. We've been able to FOIA successfully for contracts. We've been able to FOIA successfully for emails. For example, emails between our mayor and our police chief about Flock and about our campaign. We've been able to see all of that. But data about Flock specifically, including like where, for example, cameras are located in the city, we've found gets excluded from, like, we'll get told that we cannot FOIA that information. It'll be excluded from our request. There's a couple of good FOIA request guides in the chat. I can bump again DFlock's FOIA guidance, and I can drop another one from a rural organizing project. I think there's a lot that you can do if you have a good mind to rewrite things really, really precisely. If you can work with somebody who's good at writing those. I'm very lucky on the campaign that we're running in Richmond, Virginia, to have as the person who's running the campaign with me as being somebody who's very good at writing and reading contracts. And so we've been able to be really like dogged about that, but we've still found those blocks against like the data that Flock collects, and in just trying to get access to the contracts after our contract was supposed to be up June 30th. A budget passed with no amendment to remove Flock from it. We're trying to figure out what that means for the Flock contract. We tried to FOIA again for the contracts. We got hit with a $9,000 paying $9,000 to continue playing this game email yesterday. I think there's going to be a lot of that, even if you're not asking for something sensitive. So I'm sorry, this is not like at all a satisfying answer. It's not a very good answer. I don't have like the secret sauce for writing a FOIA that gets you that information, at least not in Virginia, where at least not in Richmond, Virginia, where they've really blocked access to that information. I would imagine it's kind of the same as that anywhere. I don't know if maybe Sarah has something, or Cathy has anything better to say about it than that, but that has been the Richmond, Virginia experience when it comes to FOIA. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll hop into the chat and see how to get that link to be useful. But I will also say, maybe before abandoning this topic, that we've had a lot of success. Our DSA includes one gentleman who is bar licensed in Virginia and who has been prepared to like come with us to help us file like a civil suit against any agency that's like dragging their feet on a FOIA. That has been helpful for us to be able to put pressure. I know not every DSA has that composition. I know it's kind of difficult in general to find lawyers in general who will do anything for free in general. Not a ton of movement lawyers out here, but there are some. Hashtag let's go Sarah, we love you. But anyways, so that's what I'll say about that. I'll try to plop things in the chat that have guided our campaign, and I will also maybe plug that we're trying to do another call. So we've scheduled to do another call with the same group on August 13th for chapters to share what strategies they have found to get over roadblocks like this together. And maybe this would be something we can like work on a little bit together in the future.
Thanks, Victoria. My understanding is also some folks have had success requesting specifically like camera installation contracts and pole specification sheets. Just for the person asking specifically about the breakaway bases. Okay, we are at time. There are a lot of other questions that were in the chat. We will try to answer those via the email or potentially on one of our future calls, especially if you are a DSA member. And if you are not, we encourage you to join. I'm going to pass it to Marilia, who's going to talk about those opportunities to get more involved, and especially for folks who mentioned the various differences in campaigns, also different national and local partners. This is not an extensive, list of people who are working on this effort. So of course we want to, make sure that folks are aware that there are other folks that are also taking part in this work and what might make sense for you locally. So I'll pass it to Marilia.
Thanks, Christian. Okay, let me get myself on spotlight here. All right. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for all of our speakers. Let's drop a bunch of emojis everywhere as I make these announcements and we close out. And thanks everybody for being a little late or for staying a little late. So if you're not in DSA, join DSA. Check out the chat. There's going to be links dropped in there for next steps. We have a follow-up call to this, especially if you're a DSA member, to hear from chapters that are working on this on August 13th. So go ahead and sign up for that. That link's going to be dropped. If you're in DSA, join the International Migrant Rights Working Group. That's the working group that put this call together. Let's see. And we also have an interest form. So if you're in DSA and you're interested in building this work in your chapter, or you want to be connected to somebody to talk about how to do this, and if there's like work already happening in your city, how to find out if that's the case, fill out this form. All right. I think that's all I have. Make sure to join DSA if you're not a member. Thanks to our speakers, and I am going to get us some music to close us out. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for being here.